Um, if you haven't attended or watched recordings of the previous sessions, Kara and I are with KR Creative Strategies. We're a communications and marketing company that primarily serves agricultural and conservation organizations, and including several conservation districts across the nation. So being able to provide these sessions with the Southwest region of NACD is right in our wheelhouse and a real treat for us, and our interest in supporting voluntary conservation efforts. So yeah, today we're going to be building off of the previous two sessions a bit. If you haven't seen those sessions, don't worry. You can watch the previous recordings and there won't be anything in here that you won't understand or any kind of jargon from those sessions that you need. But it is a nice next step from our previous sessions on storytelling and communicating the unique value of conservation districts. Because with those two skills, those really set you up to have very effective communication with decision makers and policymakers. So that's what we'll be going over today. And wanted to start with some things that Kara and I have seen. So Kara and I both have experience meeting with all kinds of decision makers, local government, state government, federal government, tribal governments, and councils, and then other decision makers, funders, grant funders, things like that. So we wanted to start with some of the things that we've seen, both the good and the bad. And we'll start with the bad just to get over that. And some of the things that we'll be talking about in our session today. Part of why we wanted to share this is we're not trying to be too elementary in any of the tips that we share today, but we literally have seen some things go fairly wrong and also fairly right. And so we're trying to pull tips together for you today based on how to avoid the rabbit holes and how to really thrive when you have these meetings and have successful outcomes from them. So we have seen cases where folks go into a meeting with a decision maker and that decision maker literally walks out, leaves the room. And I will say the one time that I witnessed that, it was because they were extremely busy. They were short on time, and it was a conservation district in this case. They did not feel that that conservation district spoke or got to a point that was related to their priorities fast enough. And within a couple minutes, they interrupted them and said if they didn't have anything that was going to relate to their priorities, they were going to leave the room, and they did. So that's an example of what can go wrong. We've also seen missed meetings simply because folks hadn't done their homework about where they were supposed to go. So they had an important meeting scheduled with the decision maker, and then they didn't show up, not because they forgot, but simply because they hadn't figured out parking or how long it would take to get from where they parked to where they were going, and just looking at maps in advance, something as simple as that. There have been missed opportunities where folks have met with the decision maker and only later realized that this decision maker shared a priority that they had, but they hadn't made that connection in time and done the homework again and before that meeting in order to speak to that, which could have opened up some opportunities for them at their district. Often there's some TMI, too much information shared within a short period of time, and confusion. And it's so easy to do. I think when you have an opportunity to sit down with a decision maker, especially someone that could offer funding or really open up doors for your conservation district, it can be very easy to overshare, to think that you have to get everything out on the table about all the amazing things you do on this window that you have to do it. And unfortunately, by not focusing on 1 to 2 priorities that really relate to that specific decision maker, sometimes that just means it all just becomes a blur, nothing really stands out, and they end up more confused than when they first met you. And then we've also seen cases where there's a team of folks that come in to meet with the decision maker, and there just hasn't been quite enough rehearsal to know who's saying what. So there's confusion about who's on first. folks talking over each other, maybe not hitting all the points they meant to. And again, it's more of that planning, maybe not having as much planning done to make sure that it was very clear who's speaking to which point and when.
And it's not always on the group that is presenting's side of the things where things can go terribly wrong. We've also seen times where the legislator or the policymaker themselves isn't behaving at a standard that everybody expects. I've seen dogs in the room. I've seen the dogs behave inappropriately, and there's that tension between this is the policymaker's dog. How do we handle that? There are very awkward, weird things that can also happen on behalf of the other side of the table that can make things a little bit awkward. So yeah, I think between Laura and I, we could maybe write a book about things that have gone poorly, but also on the flip side of that, things that have gone extremely well. We have witnessed when communication just flows, everybody knows their role, and they connect with the policymaker, whether it's at a local level or a federal level, and the outcome becomes great because of the clockwork that a lot of prep goes into, but when that clockwork works really well, and you're able to flow and you're all on the same page, it works amazingly well. Go ahead, Laura, next. We've also had where meetings turn into partnerships. That's a great point, to where we actually are building relationships in those short, we have anywhere, Laura and I were talking, anywhere between 5, maybe 10 minutes. And we have seen where meetings can turn into partnerships with those folks that you're talking with, and then the outcomes turn out incredibly well. We've also seen those light bulbs go off, where those aha moments, when the talking points that you've created resonate really strongly, and that decision maker really wants to get engaged with the group that they're in front of. Yeah, we've seen a lot of champions evolve from short, quick meetings, places where you can find a sponsor for your legislation, or simply find a champion for, even if it's a locally led effort. Those kind of things can happen in a short amount of time, which is really cool to witness. And then what we all are striving for, success, both from budget provisos to legislation to language changes. Maybe there's some bills out there where we just need to tweak some language or add a couple of things. Even when there's unfavorable circumstances around, either maybe we're in a year where budgets are being cut. Maybe we're in a year where there's been a huge transition of policymakers, and you have a ton of folks to have to re-educate, or new folks. A lot of freshmen come in and they really have no idea what a conservation district even means and what they do. We have seen those, like I just said, under unfavorable circumstances, we've seen a lot of great things happen.
And so you might have picked up that a lot of the things that we've seen both not go as well and go really well can be tied back to the amount of time spent planning. So in whatever way you'll be communicating with the decision maker, I think that is, if you only take one thing from the session today, that would be it, is the majority of your time spend it planning. Our decision maker communication equation is that you spend 70% of your time planning for it, getting ready, making sure you're prepared, making sure your whole team is prepared, your materials, your stories, how you'll introduce your conservation district. All of that is a huge portion of effective communication with the decision maker. So that's your main section. The 70% is spent on that. Then there's 20% on the actual execution when you're in the meeting or having the communication, and whatever platform that takes, and then 10% of following up. And that's really how we're going to break out our session today. We're going to spend a lot of the time sharing some tips on planning, and then a section on execution and a section on follow-up. And at the end of the session, we will have a resource to share with you. So just so you know, most of these tips will be captured in this checklist. that will be available for you after this session. Walks through all the things to do while you're planning, to prepare for execution and follow-up. So most of these tips will be captured for you in that resource. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time, especially when I find myself rushing into a project or rushing to prepare for a meeting with a decision maker. It says, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. I think that could not be better said, especially when it comes to decision maker communication. You want to come into that communication really sharp, and you have to be ready to defend whatever kind of investment you're looking for. A lot of times it's going to be an investment of public funds. As a conservation district, a lot of the funding that districts get can be state funds, can be tribal funds, can be federal funds. So these are all publicly funded accounts, and whoever you're speaking to, they need talking points as much as anybody of why this is the right investment of those precious public funds. So the planning is really what helps you come in as sharp as you can. You've got to have your sharpened axe ready to come in and really defend what it is you're asking for, and really demonstrate that you recognize the significance of the time that you have with the decision maker and your ask. And that starts with research. So for local, state, tribal, federal decision makers, grant funders, there are a lot of different ways you can do this research. It doesn't have to take a ton of time, but the payoff can be really huge. When it comes to a specific decision maker, a great place to start is their biography. In preparing conservation districts for their state legislative days, or preparing our state conservation partnership for the NACD fly-in, spent a lot of time just visiting the biography pages of the folks they're going to be meeting with, whether it's an agency leader or an elected official, finding out what did they do before they ran for office? What did they do before they were in this decision maker role? Where did they volunteer? A lot of you are volunteers at your conservation district, and you're choosing that because of how much you care. Similarly, if you look up what other folks have done with their volunteer time, that'll give you pretty good indicators of what they really care about, and some ideas of how to frame your asks, what you're wanting, the support that you need for them in a way that's going to resonate. For foundations or funders, you can read about their about section on their website. Typically, they'll start talking about the history of the foundation, why they exist, and kind of getting back to that core of why they came to be. Similar, I mean, conservation districts are very familiar with their beginnings in the Dust Bowl and why it was so important to engage private landowners, and the solution for that issue. Find out the reason why this foundation or funder has existed, or this funding pool came to exist. What was the ultimate reason behind it? And that'll help you figure out priorities. You can also look at like the original campaign page if it's an elected official. What were their campaign platforms? Once they were elected, what legislation have they sponsored? What if they vote? What's their vote record? What types of things get a yes vote from them? And then also finding out who they trust, and mutual connections. And those mutual connections don't have to be a person, they can also be a place. We were in a meeting once with the governor of Washington State, and prior to it, we found out that he spent his childhood vacationing in an area just outside the Yakima Valley in Washington State. And in order to, we wanted to gain support for a riparian program. So we very purposefully chose an example of a project completed by a conservation district that was in this area where he used to vacation as a child. And he had mentioned it. It was so important to him, he talked about it in his biography. So just things like that, it'll help you decide, it helps you set priorities of all the different work that your conservation district has done. It can help you kind of focus in, make it easier to decide which things you'll speak to, which projects and stories you'll share. And the other important piece is once you've done this work, be sure it's recorded somewhere for your district. There's board turnover, there's staff turnover. Make a living document where you have a list of all the key decision makers. It can be an Excel spreadsheet, it can be a Word document, something simple, but make a list of all the key decision makers that are important to your district and just fill in some notes. Where you have mutual connections, what their priorities are, what types of committees they serve on, what that legislation is that they've sponsored, so that there's a quick reference for you and anyone else who comes after you to build on and update, so that there is and that becomes part of board orientations moving forward as well.
And a lot of folks that do this type of work have lobbyists. You know, a lot of state organizations, federal organizations, they already have lobbyists on staff or contracted with that do some of this work, but it's never a bad idea to do the homework yourself. And you know, a lot of times our lobbyists serve a lot of different clients, so it's always good to do this research and to do this homework yourself as the local CD, just so that you guys have that knowledge and you can connect, because it's going to be meeting you guys that makes, you know, takes it from the 2-yard line into the end zone. So having that knowledge right at the tip of your tongue is incredibly helpful. Another example of some good research that almost took a bad turn, but we were pushing some legislation for our turf grass folks, and it was, our legislation had to do with artificial fields and the PFAS that's in artificial sports fields and public play fields and ball fields and all of that. And so we had done our homework, and we had put on our top of our list to go and try to make a champion with this urban legislator who sponsored the anti-plastics bill the year before. And we were like, she's perfect. She's a mom. She cares about plastics. This is a great person to help us champion this bill. And we walked into her office, and we had great rapport right off the bat. And we said, we know that you strongly oppose plastics. We're here to talk about artificial playing surfaces. And she goes, oh, I've got an artificial grass lawn in my backyard. And so we kind of had to be quick on our feet, but because we had done our research and our homework, we were actually able to take that kind of side aha moment that did not go in our favor, and we were able to turn it back, and she actually did become a champion for our bill that we were running, our budget proviso. And she actually is considering taking the artificial turf out of her backyard and putting in natural grass, which was definitely a cherry on top. But again, we could not have done that had we not done the homework that Laura was just talking about. This slide is, I love this slide because it is always time to build relationship, whether it's in the heat of session or in the summertime, especially before you make an ask. It's always great to start building rapport, start building relationships in the off season. You can take the lessons from our previous 2 research and outreach sessions to work. Continue to work on translating all of the great work that you do into stories, publish those on social media, send them directly to the decision makers and their staff. A lot of times, the staff actually are the ones who have all the historical knowledge, and they're helping the policymakers as best they can. So don't underestimate the power of staff. Really work on those relationships with elected officials before you go in for an ask. Tell your effective stories on hosted tours. We love doing tours for our clients. We love getting as many folks out on the ground. There's nothing better to tell your story than by eyes, ears, and seeing everything in person that you guys are doing. If you can get a tour together, partner with different groups to help host a tour. I know a lot of this work already is being done. It's a great chance to piggyback with somebody that's already doing some legislative tours or policymaker tours. If you hear about it happening, don't be afraid to ask, hey, do we have a role as the local conservation district to share our story there as well? And like I said, use your staff and develop relationships with the staff on the policy side as well, so that they can help tell those stories on your behalf, especially if some of your target legislators are from urban areas. Because most of them aren't going to know fully what it is that a conservation district does. So that staff that works on their behalf are going to be incredibly critical to helping tell your story correctly. So again, strengthen numbers and get as many champions as you can before you're even teed up to make the ask. And then as soon as you know, this goes into the planning, as soon as you know when and what you're going to ask for, start putting together your deadlines. Basically, as soon as you know you're going to be asking for something, start researching all of those important dates, whether it's on a federal, state level, or local level. Lean on your national organization, your state organization, your agencies, your conservation agencies. They can help with this as well, in case you don't know, okay, when is the first deadline? When is the cutoff date? When does the governor's budget go into place? When do we need to be making these asks? Lean on staff at your state organization, at your national organization, to help with that. It's very important that full conservation district board is aware of those deadlines, so that you know, okay, we have to make sure that our meetings take place before X, before December. Right now, Laura and I are working on state priorities. We started in May working on, putting kind of the dominoes into place for legislation that we're going to be pushing in January at a state level. So when do you need to have a draft of your bill? These are just some examples of things that you should be thinking about. When is the good time for us to reach out to the legislators themselves? Again, building that relationship before you make the official ask. We lean a lot on our Department of Agriculture here in Washington State. So it's even reaching out to those folks to say, okay, do you guys have a role to play in helping us, push this over the end zone? Looking at when the budget request deadlines are. We have missed in the past, we have missed governor budgets that we could have fit certain parts and pieces into, simply because we didn't know. We didn't have that relationship with staff. We didn't know when the deadline was. Now we do. So it's important to go through the calendar, make sure you put those dates in, and then build basically your task list backwards from there. And then start implementing at that point in time. And really looking at all of those things that are up. Yes, sorry, I was a step behind here. Define your success. This is a really important one, and Laura can help with this slide as well. What does success look like in both the short term and the long term? This might be your priority, your top priority might be 5 years in the making, but it doesn't mean that you don't start today. But knowing what that long-term goal is, and then also looking at, okay, what are the short-term goals that we have? What does success look like? Does it look like a budget proviso getting granted? Does it look like just educating people? For a lot of clients, that's sometimes what our true success is for that particular biennium budget. It's, hey, we know this is going to take us a while, so this year we're just going to start talking about it. We're just going to start educating about it. And keep your priority list relatively short. Define your top 2 priorities. Each concept, when you step into that 5 to 10 minute meeting, takes time to explain. Most in my knowledge of the conservation district world, there's some really hard things to explain in your world, especially at the level that legislators can understand. So know how to budget your time. If you overwhelm decision makers with too much information, the odds of them remembering what you talked about is pretty slim. It goes way down. You can have a couple of your number 3 and number 4 priorities in your back pocket if time allows, but really narrow down your priority list to 1 or 2 top priorities. Make sure you get those in when you're discussing, and then have a couple more in your hip pocket as far as, you know, if there's time. What you really want to get down to is being able to explain your issue and then have a great question and answer time period. And that's exactly what the next step is. Define the ask. What are you asking for? Be very specific in what it is you want this legislator or this policymaker to do. Be ready with your budget account that suggests the funding, where it needs to come from. Do your homework on what agencies are going to be involved. Work with those staffs. Be ready to explain to the legislator exactly where that budget, that proviso language, where it needs to be, which committee it should go through. They can help with some of that too. But if you already kind of have an idea of, hey, I think it should go with, you know, it should go through the ag committee, or should it go straight to the budget committee? Those kind of things are important to, you know, not only kind of have an idea in your head, but also be ready to ask your legislator, because they can, if they're your champion, they can help make those decisions as well. If you don't have a champion, think about that. Who could be the champion for your bill, for your budget, for your proviso? Who could be the 1 or 2? If you want 2, if you want 1 in the House and 1 in the Senate, that's great. If you want it bipartisan, that's great too. Consider who serves on the right committees that you think are going to be the first ones to review your language. How will you pitch that to them? Think about that as well. How will you go about that? Again, this goes back to our previous slides of do your homework in advance and see who might be a good fit. Just like my turf grass example, went in thinking she was going to be a champion, almost didn't, but then was able to seal the deal with that at the end.
And so before we start talking about assembling the team that you'll put together to have these meetings or communications with these decision makers, another thing to keep in mind too is when you're setting priorities and figuring out your ask, it probably should be different depending on who you're going to be communicating with. So if you are in a conservation district that is where wildfire preparedness has become a higher priority for your district, and but your district spans some different climates and different regions. One section maybe is not as wildfire prone, while the other is. You don't always have to have the same conversations with the same 2 priorities that you set don't have to be the same priorities that you share with every decision maker or policy maker you meet with. You can change it up. You can have a priority that's going to resonate with the decision maker that maybe isn't in so much of a wildfire forested area. Maybe they care more about local food, and so you have something more related to ag viability or farmland preservation. That's a priority that you talk with them about. While that top priority related to wildfire, you reserve for those folks where that is also their priority because they are in it, they are in that area. So think of every communication you have with a decision maker, approach it the same way you do with a landowner that you're meeting with. Districts never do a one-size-fits-all approach when they meet with a landowner. It's always finding out what their needs are, what do they care about, what their goals are, and tailoring what you offer to them based on what you learn. Same approach with the decision maker and helping you figuring out which priorities to bring up with them and what asks to make of them. Very specific to the person, to the individual. So once you have all that set, especially if you'll be meeting in person with a decision maker, whether it's an elected official, whether you're meeting with a foundation board about a funding opportunity, a local council, you want to assemble a good team. And a team of 2 to 3 is really ideal. Recommend a max of 4 people. And part of the reason I say that is we've been in meetings where, they only have maybe 10 minutes for a meeting with the decision maker, and they literally spent 5 of those minutes, half of their time, trying to assemble chairs for all the people that were in the room. Because they might not be set up to accommodate your group. So if you have more than 4 folks that are really necessary to attend the meeting, always be sure to alert the staff of that decision maker, let them know the size of your group in case they want to make those accommodations earlier, even I can advise you on a better room for your meeting. And there'll be different roles for those team members. First role is the team lead or facilitator. So their role, we suggest that includes that they be the one who introduces themselves and your team. So that can save a ton of time right there. If you're limited on time, if you each take time to introduce yourself, that can really take away time from the meeting and from your time to introduce the really important issue that you want to get to. So have a team lead that introduces the individuals, shares the 1 to 2 sentence value statement that you've created about your district. So they've got a quick introduction to who you are and how you're different from anyone else that they're going to meet with right off the bat. They deliver the 1-pager, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. They keep track of time, and they help your group get from, if you have multiple meetings in one day with decision makers, they're kind of in charge of making sure the group is getting from A to B on time. Then you have a note taker, and this will be the team member who's really tracking the questions that come up from the folks you're meeting with, tracking the commitments that you as a district are making, and follow-up. So if you're committing to get back to them with an answer to a question they've asked, they're making note of that. So that when you leave that meeting, you can really promptly go through that list and know that you have made note of everything that you said you would do, and can demonstrate that you are someone who can be depended on by tracking and following up promptly. And then the third role is preferably a constituent and storyteller. So this ideally would be someone that isn't on your board, is not on your staff, but has been a beneficiary of CD services. They've been a cooperator in voluntary conservation with you, and they can speak to why that's been important to them as someone who is a constituent of the decision maker, or someone who is the ideal recipient of the funds of a foundation, if that's your audience. This is someone that hopefully you can share some of the tips from our first storytelling session with, so they can really translate what was done in partnership with the district or with the program you're promoting or the funding that you're trying to gain support for. They can really speak to what that looked like on the ground personally. And if possible, for all those 3 team members, it's wonderful if that makeup can really represent a diversity of people, ages, backgrounds, urban, rural, so that when you walk into a room, the decision maker can see that what you are wanting support for benefits a wide variety of people in your community. When it comes to who will speak during those meetings, primarily the primary speakers, a storyteller, or even your lead, a couple of things to keep in mind when you're choosing that speaker. It's important to find someone that you can trust to be very accurate with information, and that includes being able to say, I don't have that information with me, but I'll get back to you, knowing when that's the appropriate response. Someone who can be really time sensitive, aware of the time, not sharing so much detail that it cuts into your time to actually get to the ask that you really are there to talk about. Someone who has some charisma and who can be very clear, speaking in layman's terms, very accessible language, so that the folks you're meeting with feel a part of what you're asking. And I think one thing that Kara and I both experienced is when enthusiasm eclipses a ticking clock. So we're all really passionate in conservation. I think that's why a lot of us love doing it so much and love seeing each other at NACD meetings so much, is this group of really passionate, enthusiastic people for conservation, which is a wonderful thing. And there's still room for that in these meetings. There's absolutely room for that. There's huge value to that in these meetings, but just be careful to make sure that there's some sidebars around that enthusiasm so it doesn't create where you have one speaker who spends 7 of your 10 minutes talking about a background of a story that then only leaves 2 minutes for you to get to your ask and 1 minute to discuss. So just be very aware of harnessing your enthusiasm, but keeping some sideboards around it. And also keep in mind, if you've got great speakers, all 3 of the folks on your team are wonderful speakers, you can break up your story into sections. So if you want to tell the story of a project that you're trying to get funding from a foundation for example, you can have one person provide the background, one person speak to the problem or need, and then one person speak to the proposed solution. When it comes to timing, again, this gets to that example we shared at the beginning of seeing an instance where there's confusion about who's on first, who's speaking to what when. So think about timing ahead of time. Figure out if you have only 10 minutes, how much of that time that you want to spend to talk and how much do you want for discussion. We really recommend limit to about 4 minutes even. If you've got 10 minutes, spend the max of 4 max talking and leave the whole rest of that time for discussion. That's where you really get the relationship going. You can learn and figure out ways to tie what you're asking to the funders' priorities. They want that time to weigh in, to ask questions, and it's important to value that that's something that they're looking for. Again, having your unique value statement prepared ahead of time so you don't have to spend a ton of time explaining what your conservation district is. And also having different versions. So I think this has happened multiple times where you're supposed to have 10 to 15 minutes for a meeting and you only end up with 5, maybe 7 minutes. Their previous meeting ran long, they've got a vote they've got to run into, something else has come up, and you have half the time you expected. Have different versions ready where you've got this is our ideal version, we plan for 10 minutes, this is how we plan to play that out. But if you only have 5 minutes, this is what that looks like, so you're ready.
Yeah, and gosh, there have been times where we have literally, our meeting got moved from office to the floor of the House or the Senate, and literally we pull the legislator out and we have 1 minute to get across what we need from them, or just support from them. And that is when this tool becomes a huge must. Because at the end of the day, even if you only get 60 seconds of FaceTime with the legislator or the policymaker, you can at least leave them a strong 1-pager, a 1-page document. It can be front and back, but Laura and I recommend just the front, and it's literally just problem, the need, and the solution, or the background, the problem, and the solution. If you have that to where you can say, hi, my name is Kara, I'm here representing Whatcom Conservation District. We have a really big issue with salmon in the area. We have a solution. I'd love to talk more with you about it. As long as you can hand off a 1-pager to them and their staff, that will get you out of those tricky situations. So what should be on the 1-pager? Like I just mentioned, the background, the problem, and the solution, including specific calls to action and what your ask of them is. Are you asking them to be your champion? Are you asking them just for support and helping you spread the word? It's all info at a glance. Edit, 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 then edit some more, take away prepositions, really get it down to clear and concise language. I am not a fan of AI, but this is a great opportunity for AI to come in and help you condense paragraphs, condense sentences, but really use those tools to keep those talking points and those, just line items as concise as you can get it. Use visuals before and after. I think we talked about this in another workshop that we did. There's nothing like the visual of a before the project and an after the project. Those speak volumes. If you can use some of those visuals on the one pager, that's great. That's where sometimes that front and back comes in really handy. If you can't fit the photos and it make it all work, that's where that front and back is handy at times. Consider two versions. Sometimes you're going to be talking to urban legislators where you have to take a step back and make it a little more general. For your ag area folks, they get it. They're going to know right away certain things, so you can create a different version for them. But really consider who you're talking to, keep it concise, and really hit home the main points that you need. The other great thing about having a one pager is there have been times where we've had a meeting set up, but the legislator got called into a committee meeting that they could not miss. And so we had to sit down with the staff, and it was a very brief meeting, and the one pager was great. I will say here in Washington, a handful of our legislators are no paper. So always have a PDF version. Your note taker will keep track of which legislators do you need to follow up with an email that you can send that PDF to. But yeah, so be prepared for that as well. Have your paper copies ready, but also be ready to just email the PDF. If you can send the PDF in advance of the meeting, send your one pager before the meeting even starts. That's always a great thing to do as well. Okay, this is really where a lot of Laura and I's roles have been in the past with clients, and this is where I cannot stress enough how important this is. It's going to sound really elementary, but guys, I'm telling you, this is so critical. Scope out where you're going in advance. Know where the parking is, know where you're probably going to park. Where if you need to find free parking, where is that in relation to the Capitol campus? Bathrooms, know where the bathrooms are, scope it out. Most Capitol campuses will have a map that you can download and look at before you go. Really utilize that. Know where all the offices are so that you can guesstimate how long it's going to take you to get from point A to point B. Where are you all going to meet? Odds are you're not all going in the same car. So pick a point of central location so that you know where are you going to meet. How are you going to get there? Do you have any accessibility needs that you need to accommodate for? Where are you going to eat? Have those. Most campuses obviously have one or two cafeterias. Scope those out if you can in advance. Do you have any dietary concerns that you need to be aware of? If you have a gluten-free support team with you, how are you going to, take care of their needs? And then, of course, like I mentioned before, where are all the offices? And it's not always doable. If you can arrange and schedule, which we'll talk about in a minute, efficiently, like, okay, if I'm on this end of the campus and our next meeting is over here and it takes 10 minutes to walk there and then our next one's back over here, if you can eliminate some of that, great, but at least know and scope out before you get there where all the offices are. And this is exactly that. Look at your scheduling. How are you going to get from point A to point B? Try to keep it as efficient as you can, but sometimes because of their schedules, you just can't accommodate efficiency. And sometimes you do end up just going back and forth, back and forth. Good shoes, we're going to talk about that in a minute too. But all of your work to scope it out really comes down to your scheduling. I like to give at least 5 minutes. If you've scoped out the time, Google Maps is really helpful too. Use the walking part of Google Maps, and it'll kind of give you a good estimate. I always like to buffer 5 minutes because you never know if a meeting's going to go a little long. Giving an extra 5 minutes, calculate the walk time, add in a little buffer. It never hurts to just have a moment to take a breather. Once you get there, if you're 5 minutes early, that's normally fine. Yeah, that's lean on your team, lean on your staff to help you get from point A to point B. How are you going to show up? What are you going to wear a suit and tie? Obviously, most Capital campuses, it's a suit and tie thing. Are you going to do that? A lot of folks also have gear, logoed gear that they show up for. We have a lot of strong unions that they all, our teachers union always wears purple. So they always have a new purple t-shirt that they wear. Are you going to go that route, or are you going to go the route of suit and tie? But have all those discussions beforehand. Have everybody, you know, if you're going to go suit and tie, everybody's suit and tie. What type of shoes are you going to wear? That's vital because you're going to be going back and forth a lot. Make sure that it's not only classy, but it also, you guys can stand wearing the shoes that you'll be on for 12 hours. What other leave behind materials are you going to take? Are you going to wear buttons? Are you going to have things that you pass out? We did some work, some fire recovery work for our hometown here in Medical Lake, and we left a little pin at every place that we went. Obviously, there's rules as to the value of what you can leave behind and what you can't, but have all those things figured out. Who's going to carry them? If you guys do decide to have little leave behind gifts, who's going to be in charge of that? Have all that scoped out before you go.
So we've spent the majority of our session on that planning, just like we started with the Abraham Lincoln quote, where we've been sharpening our axe. And we, the last few minutes, we'll just very quickly go through some tips for execution and follow up. But again, all of this will be on a checklist of tips that will be provided to you after the session. So once you get to the day of this communication with a decision maker, it's where all of your planning pays off. So when you arrive, make sure that your designated lead is ready to alert staff, front desk, whoever, wherever it is you're arriving. They know who to alert that you're there and that your group has arrived, and be ready to wait. Again, think about folks in your group who may have some accessibility considerations. Think about your footwear. You might have to wait for a while. There may not be chairs. And just remember to be considerate of other folks meeting and working around you. Sometimes the places you wait are pretty public spaces. And getting back to our storytelling first session, think of that opening of your meeting or communication as your hook. Really make sure it taps immediately into something that the decision maker is going to care about. And sometimes that can be thanking them for something that they've done. Even if this is your first time meeting, take some time, make sure you know something that they have done, whether it's something they sponsored, a speech they gave, something they mentioned once. Thank them for caring about something that you also care about too at your district. And playing off of that, saying like, I know you care about that. We have a solution, or we have something that can support that too. We share that with you, and here's something that we think you might want to support. So right away, they know that you understand the value of their time and what they care about, and you've done your research, and so you can get right into something they care about. When you get to your core messages, again, just making sure everybody's following their roles, they know who's on first, remaining nonpartisan the whole time, even in your side conversations in the hallway. Very simple language, again, going back to some tips from the storytelling session that we first did. Very simple language, just even pretend, and this isn't meant in a derogatory way at all, pretend you're talking to an 8th grader. That is the language level that most of us speak and read. So if you think of it as explaining your district concept or priority to an 8th grader, that can really help you out. And always be ready to say, we'll get back to you if there's something asked that you don't immediately have the answer for. That's fine, especially if you have a note taker, we'll make sure you'll follow up.
Yeah, and then be ready with your short summary of the problem, re-summarize it in closing. have a very clear call to action. Would you be willing to support us? If you don't have a champion yet, make that request. If they say yes, then you can go ahead and give them a heads up that you're going to be inviting them to stay in touch. You're going to be reaching out to them with the next steps. Have them sign on to your newsletter, send out those invitations. And the last thing, and probably another just huge elementary thing to make mention of, is keep track of your belongings. I've had to pick up after groups in Washington, D.C. It's not fun, and it's not the job of your leader to pick up after you. So just make sure you keep track of all of your stuff that you take with you. The next thing is the follow-up. So this is 10% of your time. This is another hugely important piece, but it is not what takes the most time. It's just staying involved. Your note taker should have all of those questions that you need to follow up with them on. They should have emails already in your pockets, and just basically we're closing the loop. We're following through on all of those things that was discussed in the meeting, and then moving the ball forward on who's going to help us take this over the finish line. And it's also a great opportunity to show that your conservation district is reliable, that they can trust you, that you're going to do what you said you would do. It's a great opportunity to illustrate that. So this is where, yes, you stick to your talking points. You share all the follow-ups with the team, the note taker, that's their job. The team lead coordinates the next steps with the team and the appropriate conservation district staff. Even if all the staff doesn't go to these meetings, they will be very vital in the follow-up phase and the actual lifting this over the finish line. The team lead is going to reconnect with the decision maker or the staff on behalf of the CD. Again, offer thanks, share the promised information, and invite them to stay in touch. If you do have a champion secured, another level of follow-up is going to be needed to make sure that you guys are coordinating and always on the same page with them. And then stay in touch, send out emails, include them in some of your newsletters, send them invites to relevant tours that you're going to be hosting, important events that you have coming up. Offer photos and speaking opportunities, invite them to be part of your community. If you're doing a groundbreaking ceremony, have them come in, let them kind of be the champion for you. I don't need to tell the group that these folks, they love accolades. So use those opportunities to give them thanks and share how great the next phase, the finish line, was. So next steps for us, Rachel's going to have the checklist that Laura mentioned, and she's going to send this out to everybody. It includes the planning, the execution, and the follow-up steps. And really this is a useful tool to, again, you can add to it, you can delete the stuff that doesn't quite work for you, but it's just a great little backbone to at least start the process of research and planning when it comes to these meetings.
Yeah, at this point we can open it up. We've got 5 minutes left, so I'll turn it over to you, Rachel, if folks have some questions.
Yeah, and everybody that's on, feel free to just jump off mute or put it in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with. But thank you guys for this. This is really great. While people are thinking of their questions or typing them in, I did have one that came to mind. So ideally, you are approaching a decision maker with an ask, or prepared with a request that you think that they're going to be amenable to, but sometimes districts can do things that upset people. Sometimes simple things like wildfire mitigation, people can get all up in arms about and go to their local decision makers or what have you. And so a district is kind of starting off on a back foot in that situation. So do you have any recommendations for when you don't have maybe as open of an audience as you're hoping to have?
Yeah, absolutely. We've actually been working with a conservation district on an issue like that right now. We had a conservation district who had a landowner approach them. They wanted to sell their property for the conservation district to manage into the future, uses a demonstration site, lease out, but just as a demonstration site for conservation practices. It's in an area where a lot of farmland is being turned into solar panels, and there's some risk of development, and they wanted to make sure it stayed as working lands and conserved. It upset someone in the community who had a tie to a elected official. And so they've been working with us on some messaging. Very smart. They're being very proactive. They do have it in their statute that a conservation district is allowed to own and manage property, but they were being accused of, I think the term was like vultures, circling around lands waiting to take them over, which was not at all the case. And so in this case, and I think it could work, it could apply to a lot of different scenarios. Ultimately, conservation districts are locally led. It's the community that drives your services. So most of what a district is doing is reflecting that. And so what we ended up doing in this case is really talking about how the district recognizes that the community cares about the legacy of farmland there. They care about the rural legacy of their community. And so they offer a lot of services, conservation services that protect that legacy. And that can be everything from helping to install livestock fencing so that the viability of the farm is protected into the future, to if they are approached by a community member, they can entertain the idea of owning and managing a property into the future. So it's kind of talking about how everything that a district does is a reflection of their community, which can make it a little bit harder, especially for folks who are really interested in locally led approaches to push back on district decision making. So I think, again, it also helps to always be sure of where your decisions as a board and where the direction your district is going into the future. Make sure that it does tie back into your long range plans. Hopefully there has been some community input there that you can always refer back to. If there is a question about a decision or a way the district is going, it's a great way to say, we hear you, and we do our best to make sure all of our services, all of our decisions reflect the needs and asks of our community. That's our job.
Great, thank you, Laura. Does anybody else have any questions?
This is a fun topic for Laura and I. It's hard because there's so much to dive into, and even just putting this presentation together for you all, it's going through what can we share, what should we share, what can't. I mean, this could easily be a 3-hour discussion. So there's a lot that goes into this, but at the end of the day, keeping it simple, I think, is another good thing to keep in the back of your head. Outside of the scheduling, outside of the research, when it comes to telling your story, nobody is better at sharing these awesome conservation stories than you all. And if you get down to it and you get flustered, just remember, keep it simple. Share the background, share the problem, and share the awesome solution that you guys have come up with. If you get into a conundrum where you're a little bit flustered, or you're off, or something changes and it doesn't go the way you had hoped, just remember those things. Keep it simple.
That's a great point, Karen. I think something we could probably take into a lot of areas of our lives.
So true. So true.
Let's see. Harmony asks, as a person new to the CD, my question is, how many CD managers and staff engage with legislatures, and what are their asks?
That's a great question.
Well, I mean, I can speak to some of the things I've seen. I don't know if that's anything that anyone else in the group wants to speak to as CD officials. I've seen everything from just a simple ask for someone to show up at a meeting to give a speech. Again, those are really great introductory asks. And I think that's one way to think about it too, is when we talked in the beginning about creating a document where you you make note of the important elected officials, decision makers, policy makers for your district. And make sure that you make note of which ones you already have a relationship with and which ones you have no relationship with, or maybe you're just in the beginning stages of. And what you ask of them probably should reflect that. So if you're making an ask of a freshman decision maker, think about what would be a nice entry level, knowing that their time is in demand, but also wanting to take advantage of this opportunity to develop what could become a long-term relationship if they're in this role for a while. Having them attend your annual meeting and give a speech, even just meeting them for coffee. Those are all asks of their time, just to start that relationship building. So there's that end of the spectrum. But then also all the way up to what Kara was saying of, if you know that you have something that really ties into, you've done your homework and you know that you have something that relates to a high priority for a decision maker, asking them to become the champion of that, asking them to sponsor a bill for that, sponsor a budget proviso for that. Those are all things that are really appropriate, especially if you already have that established relationship and you can really give them talking points for why this is a smart investment of public funding. They need those served up with data, not just the stories are really important, and they need to be backed up with some data. And I would also say, just in terms of how many districts, I'd love to hear Rachel's thought as the Southwest region coordinator on that. I know I'm in Iowa. I spent a lot of time working with districts in Washington. That's where Kara is now. The districts here, I would say in Washington, the majority are very active establishing relationships with decision makers at all levels, local, at their city, county, state, and federal level. A lot of them are very active with that. And I'm still fairly new to Iowa, but my understanding is the districts here, several of them are also very active here as well. But Rachel, do you have insight from the Southwest region?
Yeah, of course. So a lot of districts here as well are very active with their state and local policymakers. And Harmony, if your question is more of like a staff role versus a board role, a lot of board supervisors on districts do like to kind of take the lead with those kinds of asks. However, it is kind of district by district. Sometimes, a board may feel like their district manager is very well spoken and has a really good grasp of those issues and may ask the manager themselves to initiate those conversations. And then on a national level, we also have our spring fly-in where NACD organizes our fly-in for all the districts to go and talk to the federal policymakers. And so some districts do involve their managers in that as well. But I think a good place to start as a staff person is just inviting your decision makers to your meetings or reaching out to them if you know that there's an issue that's going to be affecting you directly. Is a great place to start as a staff person. So hopefully that answers your question. Does anybody else have any questions?
One more thought on Harmony's question. I have seen district managers in these meetings with decision makers, and ultimately I think it's some of the time it comes down to the slide we shared earlier about choosing your speakers and choosing your team. It does not have to be limited to board members. It can be if the board members are the most effective folks to speak to your priorities. If you have a staff member, even a resource technician who's very knowledgeable of an issue, is a great storyteller, very accurate, clear, timely, there's no reason to limit who is on that team. It really is who is the most effective storyteller who can provide accurate information clearly in a timely manner on behalf of your district. And oftentimes that can be the CD manager.
Thanks, Laura. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, as usual, if you think of something after you log off, you can reach out to Kara or Laura or myself with that question, and we'll be happy to answer that for you. And as Laura mentioned, this recording is available on the website and on our YouTube channel, and I'll also share it with everybody that registered today, along with that checklist that Laura mentioned earlier. So be on the lookout for that. And I just want to remind everybody that our next session, it's our 4th session of 5, is going to be August 6th at 10 a.m. as well. And it's all about capturing video on your phone. So something that I think will be very useful for everybody. We all have phones at this point. And so being able to effectively capture that video will be really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then we'll have one more in September, and then that's our session already. That really breezed by. So I want to sincerely thank Laura and Kara for their time today. This was a really great session. Lots of great information came out of it. And yeah, tell all of your friends to register for the next session and share the recording when it comes out. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.